Hey everyone, welcome back. Tonight, we're going somewhere most humans will never go. Somewhere darker than any cave, colder than any winter night, and more alien than the surface of Mars. We're descending into the deep ocean. The place where light dies, where pressure becomes a physical force that could crush you like an empty can, and where creatures exist that seem pulled from nightmares or fever dreams. Before we begin our descent, take a moment to like this video if you enjoy these journeys into the natural world, and let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is where you are. I love seeing who's drifting off with us from around the globe. Maybe you're listening in the middle of the night, unable to sleep, or perhaps it's early evening and you're winding down. Either way, you're here, and I'm glad. Now, settle in. Maybe adjust your pillow, let your shoulders drop, and take a slow breath. Because tonight we're exploring why your body, perfectly designed for life on land, would fail in almost every way if you tried to survive in the deep ocean. Not because you're weak, but because down there, the rules of biology change completely. The ocean doesn't care what works on the surface. It has its own logic, its own laws, and its own quiet, crushing indifference. Think about it for a moment. Right now, you're breathing without effort. Your lungs expand, air rushes in, oxygen diffuses across delicate membranes into your bloodstream, your heart pumps steadily. Your cells hum along, burning fuel, generating warmth, keeping you conscious and alive. All of this happens because you exist in an environment your body understands. An environment with breathable air, manageable pressure, sufficient light, and temperatures that don't immediately threaten your core functions. But the deep ocean is not that environment. It's not even close. In fact, if you could somehow be transported instantly to the abyssal plains, thousands of meters below the surface, your body would begin failing within seconds. Not minutes, not hours, seconds. And each system would fail in a different way, creating a cascade of biological collapse that would be as fascinating as it is fatal. We'll move slowly through each layer, each challenge, each adaptation you don't have. We'll talk about pressure and darkness and cold. We'll explore starvation and isolation and the strange chemistry of the deep. And by the end, you'll understand not just why you couldn't survive, but why the creatures that do are some of the most remarkable forms of life on Earth. They've solved problems your body can't even comprehend, using solutions evolution spent millions of years perfecting. So let's descend together, gently, calmly, into the deep. Let's start with the most immediate problem, the one that would hit you before you even had time to panic: pressure. Right now, as you lie there listening, the atmosphere is pressing down on your body with a force of about 14.7 pounds per square inch. That's one atmosphere of pressure. You don't feel it because you've lived with it your entire life. Your body is built around it. The air in your lungs, the gases dissolved in your blood, the spaces in your sinuses and ears, they're all calibrated to this exact amount of pressure. It's invisible, constant, and completely essential to your survival. But here's what happens when you descend into the ocean. For every 10 meters you go down, you add another atmosphere of pressure. At 10 meters, you're experiencing 2 atmospheres. At 20 meters, 3. At 100 meters, you're at 11 atmospheres. And we're not stopping at 100 meters. The deep ocean, the abyssal zone where most of the ocean floor exists, starts at around 4,000 meters. Down there, the pressure is roughly 400 atmospheres, 400 times the pressure you're experiencing right now. Imagine someone placed a weight on your chest, not a pillow or a book, but a small car, then another car, then another. Keep stacking until you have the weight of a large building pressing down on every square inch of your body. That's what 400 atmospheres feels like. Except it's not just pressing down, it's pressing in from every direction at once. Above, below, left, right, front, back. The ocean doesn't push, it compresses. Your body has air spaces, your lungs, obviously, but also your sinuses, the cavities behind your cheekbones and forehead. Your middle ear, that small chamber behind your eardrum, even your digestive tract contains pockets of gas. Under normal pressure, these spaces are fine. They're designed to hold air at 1 atmosphere. But as pressure increases, something has to give. At first, maybe at 10 or 20 meters, you'd feel discomfort. Your ears would ache as the pressure differential builds across your eardrums. Divers learn to equalize, to force air through the eustachian tubes to balance the pressure. But that only works in shallow water, and only if you're conscious and capable of the maneuver. Go deeper, and equalization becomes impossible. The pressure is simply too great. At 50 meters, your eardrums would rupture. The thin membrane can only withstand so much force before it tears. You'd feel a sharp pain, then a rush of cold seawater into your middle ear. Disorienting, nauseating, but not immediately fatal. Your sinuses would be next. The bones of your skull are strong, but the air cavities within them are vulnerable. As pressure increases, blood vessels in the sinus lining would burst, filling those spaces with blood instead of air. It's called a sinus squeeze, and it's excruciating. But the real catastrophe happens in your lungs. Human lungs at rest hold about 6 liters of air. That volume exists because of the pressure around you, 1 atmosphere balancing the elasticity of your lung tissue. Now compress that air. At 10 meters, your lungs would be squeezed to 3 liters. At 30 meters, 1.5 liters. At 100 meters, your lungs would collapse to less than half a liter, about the size of a clenched fist. Your ribcage can only compress so far before your ribs begin to crack under the force. And even before that point, the alveoli, those tiny air sacs where oxygen enters your blood, would be crushed flat. No gas exchange, no oxygen absorption. You'd be drowning in air, or what's left of it. This is called barotrauma, injury caused by pressure. It's the reason submarines have reinforced hulls and why deep-sea submersibles are built like tanks. Human tissue, soft and flexible and filled with compressible spaces, simply can't withstand the force. You'd need to be solid all the way through, with no air pockets, no hollow spaces, nothing that could collapse. And here's the beautiful, strange thing. Some creatures are exactly that. Deep-sea fish don't have swim bladders, those gas-filled sacs that help shallow water fish control their buoyancy. Swim bladders would implode at depth. Instead, deep-sea fish are filled with watery tissue, gelatinous flesh, and oil-filled livers. Their bodies are the same density as the water around them, so pressure equalizes completely. No air spaces means no barotrauma. They're not fighting the pressure, they're made of it. Jellies and soft-bodied invertebrates thrive down there for the same reason. Their bodies are more than 90% water, and water doesn't compress. Pressure passes through them without resistance. They're not rigid, not hollow, not vulnerable in the way you are. They exist in a state of fluid equilibrium with their environment. You, on the other hand, are a creature of air and bone and delicate membranes. You need those hollow spaces. They're part of your design, essential for breathing, for hearing, for speaking, for sensing the world. But in the deep ocean, those spaces become weaknesses. They're points of failure, collapsing one by one as the weight of the water bears down. By the time you reached 200 meters, your lungs would be destroyed, your sinuses would be filled with blood, your ears would be ruptured and flooded, and you'd still have thousands of meters left to descend. The pressure that crushed your airspaces is just the beginning. It's working on your cells now, on the proteins and enzymes that keep you alive, but we'll get to that later. For now, just understand this. The deep ocean doesn't need teeth or venom or claws to kill you. It kills you with simple physics, with weight, with the quiet, patient force of 4,000 meters of seawater pressing in from all sides, and there's nothing you can do to stop it. But even if you could somehow solve the pressure problem, you'd still be facing the next challenge. Total, absolute, unending darkness. So you've made it past the crushing pressure. Somehow, impossibly, your body has adapted. Your lungs haven't collapsed, your sinuses haven't filled with blood, and you're still conscious. Congratulations. Now, open your eyes. What do you see? Nothing. Absolutely nothing. Not the vague darkness of a moonless night, not the dim grey of a cloudy evening, not even the darkness of your bedroom with the lights off and the curtains drawn. This is a darkness so complete, so absolute, that the human brain struggles to process it. It's the darkness of a place where light has never existed and never will. Welcome to the aphotic zone. Let's talk about what happens to light in the ocean. At the surface, sunlight streams down through the water, illuminating everything in shades of blue and green. The first 10 meters are bright, almost as bright as being on land. Colors are vivid. You can see clearly in all directions. This is where most ocean life congregates, where photosynthesis happens, where the food chain begins. But as you descend, light begins to fade. Water absorbs light, and it does so selectively. Red wavelengths disappear first, filtered out within the first few meters. That's why everything looks blue-green underwater. Then orange fades. Then yellow. By the time you reach 30 meters, you're seeing only blues and greens, and even those are dimming rapidly. At 100 meters, you're in the twilight zone, the place where light exists, but barely. It's the perpetual dusk, a realm of shadows and silhouettes. Some light still penetrates from above, but it's weak, diffuse, insufficient for photosynthesis. Plants can't live here. The food chain shifts entirely to predation and scavenging. And then, at around 200 meters, the last photon of sunlight gives up. It's been scattered, absorbed, converted to heat by the water molecules above. 200 meters is where the ocean goes completely, irreversibly black. And remember, the abyssal plains are at 4,000 meters. You still have 3,800 meters of lightless descent ahead of you. Your eyes, remarkable as they are useless here. Human vision depends entirely on light. Photons enter your eye, pass through the lens, and strike the retina at the back of your eyeball. There, specialized cells called rods and cones absorb those photons and convert them into electrical signals your brain interprets as sight. Rods handle low light and motion. Cones handle color and detail. Together, they give you the ability to navigate, recognize faces, read, and perceive the world in extraordinary detail. But all of that machinery requires one thing: light. Without photons, your rods and cones have nothing to absorb. They sit idle, waiting for input that will never come. You could have the most powerful, sensitive eyes in the animal kingdom, and it wouldn't matter. You can't see what isn't there. In the deep ocean? Now, close your eyes for a moment. Imagine staying like this. Not for a few seconds, not for an hour, but forever. No shapes, no shadows, no light bleeding through your eyelids, just endless, formless black. Your brain, deprived of visual input, would begin to misfire. You'd start seeing things that aren't there. Phosphenes, those little sparks and patterns that appear when you rub your eyes or when your visual cortex gets bored and starts making things up. It's called visual hallucination, and it happens to people in sensory deprivation. Your brain needs stimulation, and when it doesn't get it, it creates its own. But let's say you could handle the psychological weight of eternal darkness. You'd still be lost. Humans navigate primarily by sight. We orient ourselves visually using landmarks, horizons, the position of the sun or stars. In the deep ocean, there are no landmarks. No up or down except what you feel in your inner ear, no reference points, no way to judge distance or direction. You drift, tumbling slowly in three-dimensional space, unable to tell if you were moving forward or backward, rising or sinking. Deep-sea creatures have solved this problem in ways that feel almost like science fiction. Some have evolved enormous eyes that take up half their skull, packed with millions of rod cells to capture every stray photon. The giant squid has eyes the size of dinner plates, the largest eyes in the animal kingdom. Not to see sunlight, but to detect the faint glow of bioluminescence from other creatures. Because that's the only light down here, not sunlight, but bioluminescence. The light produced by living organisms through chemical reactions in their bodies, certain bacteria, jellyfish, squid, and fish have evolved the ability to generate light using a molecule called luciferin and an enzyme called luciferase. When they react, they produce a cold, blue-green glow. It's efficient, controllable, and used for everything from attracting prey to communicating with mates to confusing predators. The deep ocean isn't completely dark. It's a place of scattered, flickering lights in an endless void, like stars in space, but alive. Anglerfish dangle glowing lures in front of their mouths, tempting smaller fish to swim closer. Lanternfish have rows of photophores along their bellies, camouflaging their silhouettes against the faint light from above. Some squid shoot glowing ink clouds as decoys, and certain jellyfish pulse with rhythmic, hypnotic light as they drift through the current. It's beautiful, in its way, alien and strange, but beautiful. However, you can't produce bioluminescence. You don't have luciferin in your cells. You don't have photophores dotting your skin. You're not adapted to signal, to hunt, to navigate by self-generated light. You're just a dark shape in a dark world, invisible and blind. And then there are the creatures that gave up on sight entirely. Many deep-sea species are born without eyes, or with vestigial eyes, tiny, useless remnants of organs their ancestors once needed. They navigate by smell, by electroreception, by sensing vibrations in the water through specialized cells along their bodies. They've abandoned vision because vision abandoned them first. In a place with no light, eyes are just extra weight, extra energy expenditure for no benefit. Evolution is ruthlessly efficient. If you don't need it, you lose it. But you still have eyes, big, complex, energy-hungry human eyes that are trying desperately to see and failing. Your pupils are dilated as wide as they'll go, your rod cells are firing randomly, and your brain is spiraling through confusion and hallucination. You're disoriented, isolated, adrift in sensory nothingness. And even if you could somehow adapt to the darkness, adjust your expectations, make peace with being blind, you'd quickly realize there's another problem, one that creeps in slowly but never leaves. The cold? You're blind, you're crushed by pressure, and now you're starting to notice something else. A creeping sensation spreading through your limbs. At first, it's barely noticeable. A slight chill, the kind you'd feel stepping outside on a cool autumn evening. But it doesn't stop there. It deepens, it tightens, and within minutes, it becomes the only thing you can think about. You are cold, profoundly, bone-deep, life-threatening cold. Let's talk about temperature. At the ocean's surface, depending on where you are in the world, water temperature can be quite pleasant. Tropical seas hover around 28 to 30 degrees Celsius. Temperate zones might be 15 to 20 degrees. Even cold northern waters are usually somewhere between 5 and 10 degrees at the surface. These are temperatures humans can tolerate, at least for a while, especially with a wetsuit. But as you descend, the warmth of the sun fades along with the light. By 1,000 meters, the temperature has dropped to around 4 degrees Celsius. By 2,000 meters, it's hovering between 2 and 3 degrees. And at 4,000 meters, down on the abyssal plains, where most of the ocean floor stretches out in endless darkness, the water temperature stabilizes at around 1 to 2 degrees Celsius, just barely above freezing, cold enough to kill you slowly, methodically, and without mercy. Your body is a furnace, not metaphorically, literally. You generate heat constantly through metabolic processes, through the chemical reactions happening in every cell, breaking down glucose, synthesizing proteins, transmitting nerve signals, contracting muscles. All of this produces heat as a byproduct. Your core temperature, the temperature deep inside your torso where your vital organs live, is maintained at around 37 degrees Celsius. That's 98.6 degrees Fahrenheit. It's not negotiable. Your enzymes, the molecular machines that keep you alive, only function properly within a very narrow temperature range. Too hot or too cold, and they stop working. In normal conditions, you lose heat gradually, through your skin, through your breath, through radiation and convection. Your body compensates by generating more heat. You shiver when you're cold, which is just your muscles contracting rapidly to produce warmth. You eat food to fuel the furnace. You put on clothes to insulate yourself, and most of the time, you stay balanced, warm enough to function, cool enough not to overheat. But water changes everything. Water conducts heat away from your body 25 times faster than air. That means, in cold water, you lose heat at a catastrophic rate. Your skin, in direct contact with water that's 35 degrees colder than your core, begins bleeding warmth immediately. And there's no insulation, no layer of trapped air to slow the transfer. Just cold water pressed against every inch of your skin, pulling heat away molecule by molecule. Within the first few minutes, your body responds aggressively. Blood vessels in your extremities constrict, pulling blood away from your skin and routing it toward your core. Your fingers and toes go numb first. Not because they're damaged, but because your body is sacrificing them to protect your heart, your lungs, your brain. This is called peripheral vasoconstriction, and it's an ancient survival mechanism. Keep the vital organs warm, let the edges go cold. But it's not enough. The cold keeps coming. Your core temperature begins to drop. 37 degrees becomes 36, then 35. At 35 degrees, you've entered mild hypothermia. You're shivering violently now, your body's last desperate attempt to generate heat. Your thinking becomes sluggish, your speech slurs. You feel confused, disoriented, like you're drunk or dreaming. At 34 degrees, moderate hypothermia sets in, shivering stops. not because you're warming up, but because your muscles don't have enough energy left to contract. You're exhausted, drained, running on fumes, your heart rate slows, your breathing becomes shallow, you're drowsy, apathetic, indifferent to your own survival. Part of you just wants to sleep, to close your eyes and drift away into the numbness. At 32 degrees, severe hypothermia begins. Your heart rhythm becomes erratic. Your organs are shutting down one by one as the chemical reactions that sustain them grind to a halt. You're barely conscious. And here's the strange, cruel irony. You might start to feel warm. It's called paradoxical undressing, and it happens in the final stages of hypothermia. Your brain, starved of oxygen and confused by failing systems, misinterprets signals. You feel hot, burning up. People in this state have been found in the snow, naked. Their clothes scattered around them. They thought they were overheating. They were freezing to death. Below 30 degrees, you're in profound hypothermia. Your pupils are fixed and dilated. Your pulse is barely detectable. You appear clinically dead, and in most cases you are. Cardiac arrest follows. Your heart, too cold to maintain its electrical rhythm, simply stops. No blood flow, no oxygen delivery, no consciousness. The cold has won. This entire process, from normal body temperature to death, takes hours in water at 4 degrees Celsius. In water at 1 to 2 degrees, down in the abyss, it would happen faster. Much faster. Even if you somehow had air to breathe and could withstand the pressure, the cold would shut you down within an hour, maybe less. You drift through the darkness, shivering, then still, then gone. Deep-sea creatures don't have this problem. They're ectothermic, which means they don't generate their own heat. Their body temperature matches the water around them. 1 to 2 degrees Celsius doesn't feel cold to them because they have no concept of warm. Their enzymes, their proteins, their cellular machinery, all of it has evolved to function at near freezing temperatures. Some species even produce antifreeze proteins, molecules that prevent ice crystals from forming in their tissues. They're not fighting the cold, they are the cold. Their metabolism is also extraordinarily slow. They move in slow motion, hunt infrequently, digest meals over weeks or months. A fast metabolism generates heat, which requires energy, which requires food. In the deep ocean, food is scarce, so these creatures have adapted by slowing everything down. They exist in a state of suspended animation, burning just enough energy to stay alive and no more. You, on the other hand, are warm-blooded, a mammal. You burn through calories at a ferocious rate just to maintain your body temperature. And in the deep ocean, you'd be burning them even faster, trying desperately to stay warm. But there's no fuel, no food, nothing to feed the furnace. Which brings us to our next problem. Even if the cold didn't kill you, starvation would. Because down here, in the eternal darkness and crushing pressure and bone-chilling water, there is almost nothing to eat. Let's say you've somehow solved everything so far. You've survived the pressure that should have crushed your lungs. You've adapted to the absolute darkness. You've found a way to keep your core temperature from plummeting into hypothermia. Impressive. Impossible, but impressive. Now comes the next challenge. One that unfolds more slowly, but is just as deadly. Hunger. Your body is a machine that runs on fuel. Every thought you think, every breath you take, every heartbeat, every blink, every tiny movement of every cell requires energy. That energy comes from food. You break down carbohydrates, fats, and proteins into their chemical components, and your cells burn them in a process called cellular respiration. The result is ATP, adenosine triphosphate, the universal energy currency of life. No ATP, no life. It's that simple. An average adult human needs around 2,000 calories per day just to maintain basic functions. That's if you're resting, doing nothing, lying perfectly still. Add physical activity, exposure to cold, stress, and that number climbs rapidly. In cold water, trying to generate heat through shivering alone, you could burn 3,000 to 4,000 calories a day, maybe more. Your body is a furnace, remember, and furnaces need constant fuel. On land, getting food is relatively straightforward. You go to the kitchen, you open the refrigerator, you eat. Even in survival situations, there are plants, insects, animals, water sources. The surface world is abundant with organic matter. Energy flows from the sun into plants through photosynthesis, then into herbivores, then into carnivores. The food chain is vast, interconnected, and constantly replenishing itself. But the deep ocean doesn't work that way. Down here, at 4,000 meters, there is no sunlight, no photosynthesis, no plants. The entire foundation of the food chain is missing. So where does the energy come from? How does anything survive? The answer is something called marine snow. It's not actual snow, of course. It's a constant, gentle rain of organic debris falling from the surface. Dead plankton, fecal pellets from fish and whales, molted shells, fragments of jellyfish, bits of seaweed, the corpses of animals that died in the upper layers. All of it slowly sinking, drifting downward through the water column like snowflakes in an endless winter. But here's the thing. Most of that material gets eaten long before it reaches the bottom. Fish in the twilight zone intercept it. Bacteria break it down. By the time marine snow reaches the abyssal plains, it's been picked over, decomposed, reduced to the smallest, least nutritious particles. What arrives is basically dust, organic dust. It settles on the seafloor in a thin, patchy layer, and that's what deep-sea creatures have to survive on. Imagine trying to live on crumbs, not breadcrumbs from a fresh loaf, but crumbs of crumbs. The dry, stale bits that fall from a cracker that's already been sitting in the back of the pantry for 6 months. And instead of having a pile of them, they're scattered across a football field, and you have to search in total darkness to find each one. That's what feeding looks like in the deep ocean. Deep-sea creatures have adapted to this scarcity in remarkable ways. Sea cucumbers, those soft, sausage-shaped echinoderms, slowly crawl across the ocean floor, vacuuming up sediment and extracting whatever microscopic nutrients they can find. They're not picky. They eat mud, essentially, filtering it through their digestive systems and hoping there's something useful in there. It's not glamorous, but it works. Other creatures are opportunistic predators. They wait, sometimes for weeks or months, barely moving, conserving energy, until something edible drifts by. When it does, they strike with sudden, explosive speed. Then they go back to waiting. Their metabolisms are so slow that a single meal can sustain them for an extraordinary length of time. Many deep-sea fish have evolved distensible stomachs that can expand to hold prey much larger than the fish itself. Because when food is rare, you can't afford to be wasteful. If you encounter something edible, you eat all of it, even if it's twice your size. Gulper eels have jaws that unhinge and stomachs that stretch like balloons. They look absurd, almost cartoonish, but it's a brilliant adaptation. Feast when you can, because you never know when the next meal is coming. But you don't have any of these adaptations. You can't digest sediment. you can't survive for months without eating. Your stomach is normal-sized, designed for regular meals, not opportunistic gorging. And your metabolism, that warm-blooded, high-energy, calorie-burning metabolism, is working against you. You need food constantly, and there is none. Within a few days of not eating, your body starts breaking down its own tissues for fuel. First, it burns through your glycogen reserves, the stored carbohydrates in your liver and muscles. That lasts maybe 24 hours. Then it moves to fat. If you're an average adult, you might have enough fat stores to last a few weeks, maybe a month if you're lucky. But in cold water, burning extra calories just to stay warm, that timeline compresses dramatically. Once your fat is gone, your body turns to protein. It starts breaking down your muscles, your organs, anything it can cannibalize to keep your brain and heart functioning. You become weak, emaciated, a shadow of yourself. Your immune system collapses, your heart shrinks, your thinking becomes foggy and slow. Eventually, your body simply runs out of material to burn. The furnace goes cold. You starve. And here's the cruelest part. Even if, by some miracle, you found food down here, you probably couldn't eat it. Deep-sea organisms are often toxic, filled with heavy metals, strange proteins, biochemical compounds your body has no idea how to process. Or they're so nutrient-poor that digesting them costs more energy than they provide. It's a net loss. You'd be expending calories to extract nothing. Is less than #0. 7 hash is greater than. There's also the possibility of a whale fall, one of the deep ocean's most remarkable phenomena. When a whale dies and sinks to the bottom, it brings a massive influx of nutrients. A single whale carcass can sustain an entire ecosystem for decades. Scavengers swarm it. Hagfish burrow inside and eat it from within. Crabs strip the bones, bacteria break down the fats. It's a slow-motion feast, and it's one of the few times the deep ocean experiences true abundance. But whale falls are rare. The deep ocean is unimaginably vast, covering more than half the planet's surface, and whales are relatively few. The chances of stumbling upon one are astronomically low. You could drift for years and never encounter anything larger than a shrimp. So you're alone, starving, growing weaker by the hour, surrounded by darkness and cold and an environment that offers nothing. No berries to pick, no fish to catch, no water to drink, ironically, because seawater will only dehydrate you further. Just an endless, barren wasteland where food is a distant memory and survival is measured in days, not weeks. But even if hunger didn't kill you, there's something else waiting. Something harder to measure but just as deadly. The psychological weight of absolute isolation. You're cold, you're starving, you're blind, and now you're beginning to realize something even more unsettling. You are completely, utterly alone. Not the kind of alone you feel when everyone leaves the house for a few hours. Not even the kind of alone you might feel camping in the wilderness. This is a loneliness so profound, so absolute, that it begins to warp your sense of reality itself. Humans are social creatures, not by choice, but by evolutionary necessity. For millions of years, our ancestors survived because they lived in groups. They hunted together, gathered together, protected each other from predators, shared knowledge, raised children communally. Isolation meant death. Being cast out from the tribe was essentially a death sentence. And because of that, our brains are hardwired to crave social connection. It's not a preference, it's a biological need, as fundamental as food or water. Your brain releases oxytocin when you hug someone, dopamine when you laugh with friends, serotonin when you feel part of a community. These aren't just nice feelings. They're chemical rewards that reinforce social behavior, encouraging you to seek out others, to maintain bonds, to stay connected. Without them, your mental health deteriorates rapidly. Studies on solitary confinement show that even a few days of complete isolation can cause anxiety, depression, hallucinations, and cognitive decline. Your brain needs other people the way your body needs oxygen. In the deep ocean, there are no other people, obviously, but there's more to it than that. There's almost nothing alive at all. Life in the abyss is sparse, scattered across vast distances. The deep ocean is the largest habitat on Earth, covering more than 60% of the planet's surface, but it has one of the lowest population densities of any ecosystem. You could swim for hours, maybe days, and never encounter another living thing larger than a microscopic copepod. Think about the scale for a moment. The abyssal plains stretch for thousands of kilometers in every direction. Flat, featureless expanses of mud and sediment, no landmarks, no reference points, just endless, empty space. And in that space, creatures are few and far between. A fish here, kilometers away. A jellyfish there, drifting slowly through the current. A crab scuttling across the seafloor, then gone. The deep ocean is a desert, but instead of sand, it's filled with cold, black water. For the creatures that do live here, finding each other is one of the greatest challenges they face. Reproduction requires two individuals of the same species to somehow locate each other in this vast, lightless void. The odds are staggeringly low. So deep-sea creatures have evolved some of the strangest mating strategies in nature. Some species use bioluminescence to signal their presence. They flash patterns of light, species-specific codes that say, "I'm here, I'm the same as you, let's reproduce." It's like a beacon in the darkness, except the darkness is so complete that even a bright flash is only visible for a few meters. You have to be in exactly the right place at exactly the right time, miss the signal, and you might never find a mate. Other species rely on chemical cues, releasing pheromones into the water that drift with the current. A potential mate kilometers away might detect those molecules and follow the trail back to the source. It's slow, uncertain, but sometimes it works. The ocean is patient. And then there are the anglerfish, which have evolved one of the most bizarre reproductive strategies in the animal kingdom. The males are tiny, a fraction of the size of the females, and their entire existence revolves around finding a mate. When a male encounters a female, he latches onto her body with his mouth and fuses to her permanently. His tissues merge with hers. He loses his eyes, his organs, most of his body. He becomes a parasitic appendage, nothing more than a sperm-producing sac attached to the female's side. She feeds him through her bloodstream, and he fertilizes her eggs whenever she's ready. It's grotesque, yes, but also heartbreakingly practical. In a place where finding a mate is nearly impossible, you hold on when you find one. Literally. But you're not an anglerfish, you're a human, and you need more than reproduction. You need conversation, eye contact, the presence of another consciousness. You need someone to acknowledge that you exist, to respond when you speak, to share the burden of being alive. Without that, your mind begins to fracture. Sensory deprivation experiments, conducted in controlled environments, show what happens when humans are cut off from external stimulation. Subjects are placed in dark, silent rooms, floating in temperature-neutral water, with no light, no sound, no touch. Within hours, they start experiencing vivid hallucinations. They see faces, hear voices, feel phantom touches. Their brains, starved of input, start generating their own. The hallucinations aren't random. They're often familiar, loved ones, childhood memories. The brain reaches back to anything it has stored, anything that might fill the void. In the deep ocean, you'd experience something similar, but worse, because it's not just the absence of people, it's the absence of everything. No sunlight to mark the passage of time, no temperature changes to indicate day or night, no sounds, except the occasional distant rumble of tectonic activity or the faint clicks of a hunting predator. Your circadian rhythm, the internal clock that regulates your sleep-wake cycle, depends on environmental cues. Light and darkness tell your brain when to be alert and when to rest. Without those cues, your sleep cycle collapses. You drift in and out of consciousness at random, never fully awake, never fully asleep, caught in a twilight state of exhaustion and confusion. Your sense of time dissolves. Minutes feel like hours. Hours feel like minutes, or maybe days. You can't tell anymore. You lose track of how long you've been down here, how long you've been drifting, how long since you last thought clearly. Your thoughts become fragmented, looping, repetitive. You start talking to yourself, not because it helps, but because you need to hear a voice, even if it's your own. And then the hallucinations start. At first, they're subtle, a flicker of movement at the edge of your vision, a sound that might be a voice. But as time goes on, they become more vivid, more convincing. You see people you know floating beside you in the darkness. They speak to you. They reassure you, or they accuse you. Your brain can't distinguish between memory and perception anymore. Everything blurs together into a waking dream. Deep-sea creatures don't have this problem, not because they're immune to loneliness, but because they've never known anything else. They're born alone, they live alone, and they die alone. Solitude is their baseline. Their brains aren't wired to expect company or crave connection. They exist in a state of permanent isolation, and it doesn't break them because they were built for it. You weren't. You were built for community, for touch, for voices and faces and shared laughter. You were built for the warmth of another human being, for the comfort of knowing you're not the only conscious thing in the universe. And in the deep ocean, that comfort is gone. You are the only conscious thing, at least as far as you can perceive. And the weight of that realization, the crushing, suffocating weight of absolute solitude, might be what breaks you before anything else does. But even if your mind survives, your body still has other problems to contend with, starting with the fact that you're not breathing properly anymore. You're crushed, blind, freezing, starving, and losing your grip on reality. But let's say, somehow, you're still conscious, still trying to survive. There's one more immediate problem, and it's arguably the most critical of all. You're running out of oxygen. Not the oxygen in your lungs, though that's certainly an issue. The oxygen dissolved in the water around you. Because in the deep ocean, breathable air doesn't exist, and the oxygen that does exist is scarce, cold, and nearly impossible for your body to access. Let's start with the basics. Every cell in your body needs oxygen to survive. It's the final electron acceptor in the process of cellular respiration, the chemical reaction that produces ATP, your cellular energy currency. Without oxygen, your mitochondria, the tiny powerhouses inside each cell, can't generate energy efficiently. They can switch to anaerobic metabolism for a short time, burning glucose without oxygen, but it's inefficient and produces lactic acid as a byproduct. That's what causes the burning sensation in your muscles when you exercise too hard. Your cells are screaming for oxygen. On land, getting oxygen is simple. You breathe. Air, which is about 21% oxygen, enters your lungs. It passes through your bronchi, down into smaller bronchioles, and finally reaches the alveoli, those tiny grape-like sacs where gas exchange happens. Oxygen diffuses across the thin membrane of the alveoli into your bloodstream, where it binds to hemoglobin in your red blood cells. Your heart pumps that oxygenated blood to every tissue in your body. Carbon dioxide, the waste product, diffuses back into your lungs and you exhale it. The whole process takes a fraction of a second and happens automatically, about 12 to 20 times per minute, every minute, for your entire life. But underwater, you can't breathe. Humans can't extract oxygen from water the way fish do. Our lungs are designed for air, not liquid. If you tried to inhale water, it would flood your alveoli, block gas exchange, and you'd drown within minutes. You might have seen videos of people breathing oxygenated liquids in experimental settings, perfluorocarbons that can carry dissolved oxygen. It's real, but it's uncomfortable, inefficient, and requires specialized equipment. In the deep ocean, with nothing but cold seawater, you have no way to extract the oxygen your body desperately needs. Now, water does contain dissolved oxygen. It's not much, but it's there. At the surface, in warm, well-aerated water, oxygen concentrations might be around 6 to 8 milligrams per liter. That's enough to support fish, crustaceans, and other aquatic life. But as you descend, oxygen levels drop. The deep ocean, especially in certain regions, suffers from hypoxia, low oxygen conditions. In some areas, oxygen concentrations fall below 2 milligrams per liter, creating what scientists call oxygen minimum zones. These are dead zones where most large animals can't survive. Even in areas with relatively higher oxygen, it's still a fraction of what you'd find in air. And remember, you're not a fish. You don't have gills. Gills are incredibly efficient at extracting dissolved oxygen from water. They work by maximizing surface area and creating a countercurrent exchange system where water flows in one direction and blood flows in the opposite direction. This maintains a concentration gradient that allows oxygen to diffuse continuously from water into the blood. It's elegant, efficient, and completely unlike anything your lungs can do. Deep-sea fish have additional adaptations. Their metabolic rates are extraordinarily low. They move slowly, conserving energy, which means they don't need as much oxygen. Some species have evolved specialized hemoglobin that binds oxygen more efficiently at low concentrations and low temperatures. Others have increased the density of capillaries in their gills, maximizing the surface area available for gas exchange. Every aspect of their physiology is tuned for survival in an oxygen-poor environment. You, on the other hand, have a high metabolic rate. Your brain alone consumes about 20% of your total oxygen supply, despite being only 2% of your body weight. Your heart, your muscles, your liver, your kidneys, all of them are burning through oxygen constantly. And in cold water, shivering to generate heat, your oxygen demands skyrocket even higher. You're a high-performance engine trying to run in an environment with almost no fuel. Without oxygen, your body begins to fail within minutes. The first sign is confusion, dizziness, a feeling of lightheadedness. Your brain, the most oxygen-sensitive organ you have, starts misfiring. Neurons depend on a constant supply of ATP to maintain their electrical gradients, to fire action potentials, to process information. When oxygen runs low, ATP production drops and neurons begin to shut down. At around 4 to 6 minutes without oxygen, brain cells start dying. It's not reversible. Once a neuron dies, it's gone. You don't grow new ones, at least not in any significant number. This is why drowning, or any form of asphyxiation, is so dangerous. Even if someone is resuscitated, if their brain was deprived of oxygen for too long, the damage is permanent. Memory loss, cognitive impairment, motor dysfunction, personality changes. The person who comes back might not be the same person who went under. Your heart is next. Cardiac muscle cells are tough, resilient, but they also need oxygen. Without it, they can't contract effectively. Your heart rate becomes irregular, fluttering weakly, struggling to pump blood that's no longer carrying oxygen anyway. Eventually, it stops. Cardiac arrest. And once your heart stops, blood flow ceases, and every cell in your body begins dying simultaneously. But let's say you somehow had access to oxygen. Maybe you're imagining a scenario with a rebreather, a closed-circuit system that recycles your exhaled air, removes carbon dioxide, and adds fresh oxygen. These exist, and technical divers use them to explore depths that would be impossible with regular scuba gear. But even rebreathers have limits. The oxygen tanks are finite. The carbon dioxide scrubbers wear out. And at extreme depths, oxygen itself becomes toxic. This is called oxygen toxicity, and it happens when you breathe oxygen at high partial pressures. Pressure increases the amount of dissolved oxygen in your blood, and beyond a certain point, it becomes poisonous. It causes seizures, convulsions, loss of consciousness. Divers have to carefully manage their gas mixtures at depth, blending oxygen with helium or nitrogen to avoid toxicity. It's a delicate balance, and one wrong calculation can be fatal. Deep-sea creatures don't worry about oxygen toxicity because they're not breathing concentrated oxygen. They're extracting tiny amounts from the surrounding water, just enough to sustain their slow, cold-blooded existence. They've calibrated their entire biology around scarcity. You, trying to maintain a warm-blooded, fast-paced metabolism, would need a constant, abundant supply of oxygen that simply doesn't exist down here. And there's another problem. Even if you could somehow extract oxygen from the water, even if your body could adapt to the low concentrations, your cells would still be facing a different kind of pressure. Not the physical pressure of the water, though that's still crushing you, but the biochemical pressure of trying to function in an environment where the very chemistry of life is twisted, distorted, and breaking down at the molecular level. And that's where things get truly microscopic and truly catastrophic. We've talked about what happens to your body as a whole, the crushing pressure, the freezing cold, the starvation and isolation. But now let's zoom in. Let's go smaller. Past your organs, past your tissues, down to the level of individual cells. Because that's where the deep ocean wages its quietest, most insidious war. At the molecular level, where the machinery of life either functions or falls apart. Every cell in your body is a microscopic universe. Inside that thin membrane, thousands of different molecules are interacting every second. Proteins fold into precise three-dimensional shapes to perform specific functions. Enzymes catalyze chemical reactions that would otherwise take millions of years. DNA is transcribed into RNA, which is translated into proteins. Ions flow across membranes, generating electrical signals. Mitochondria produce ATP. It's a symphony of coordinated activity, and it only works because the conditions are exactly right. Those conditions include temperature, pH, salinity, and most importantly, for our purposes, pressure. Your cells evolve to function at 1 atmosphere of pressure. Every protein, every enzyme, every membrane is calibrated for that specific environment. Change the pressure, and you change how molecules behave. And in the deep ocean, at 400 atmospheres of pressure, molecular behavior changes dramatically. Let's start with proteins. Proteins are long chains of amino acids that fold into complex shapes. The shape is everything. An enzyme's ability to catalyze a reaction depends on its active site, a specific pocket or groove where the substrate binds. If the protein shape changes even slightly, the active site might not work anymore. The enzyme becomes useless. And pressure can change protein shapes. Under high pressure, proteins are compressed. The spaces between atoms shrink. Weak bonds, like hydrogen bonds and van der Waals forces, which hold the protein in its proper shape, can be disrupted. The protein might partially unfold, a process called denaturation. You've seen this happen when you cook an egg. The heat denatures the proteins in the egg white, changing them from transparent and liquid to white and solid. Pressure can do the same thing, but without the heat. For human proteins, evolved for 1 atmosphere, the pressure at 4,000 meters is enough to cause partial denaturation in some cases. Not all proteins are equally sensitive. Some are more rigid, more stable, but others, especially large, complex proteins with lots of flexible regions, start to lose their shape, and when they do, they stop working. Enzymes that regulate metabolism, proteins that transport molecules across cell membranes, structural proteins that hold cells together, all of them can be affected. Your cells try to compensate. They have quality control systems, molecular chaperones that help refold damaged proteins, but those systems are overwhelmed. There are too many proteins failing too quickly. The chaperones themselves are proteins, and they're struggling under the same pressure. It's a cascade. One failure leads to another, and the whole system begins to break down. Deep-sea organisms have solved this problem through millions of years of evolution. They produce special molecules called piezolites, which is just a fancy term for pressure-protecting molecules. These include certain amino acids like taurine and trimethylamine N-oxide, also known as TMAO. These molecules stabilize proteins under pressure. They counteract the compressive forces, helping proteins maintain their proper shapes even at hundreds of atmospheres. It's like adding a scaffolding around a building to keep it from collapsing. Some deep-sea fish have TMAO concentrations in their tissues that would be toxic to surface-dwelling creatures. But down in the abyss, it's essential. Without it, their proteins would fail and they'd die. It's a trade-off. They've adapted to a high-pressure environment by flooding their cells with molecules that only make sense in that environment. Bring them to the surface, and the pressure drops, the proteins destabilize in the opposite direction, and the fish dies anyway. They're locked into their depth range by their own biochemistry. You don't have piezolites. Your cells don't produce TMAO in anywhere near the concentrations needed to protect your proteins at depth. So your enzymes start failing. Metabolic pathways slow down or stop. Your cells can't produce ATP efficiently. They can't repair damage. They can't maintain ion gradients across their membranes. And when ion gradients fail, everything fails. Ion gradients are how cells generate electrical signals. Neurons, for example, maintain a difference in charge between the inside and outside of the cell by pumping sodium ions out and potassium ions in. When a neuron fires, it briefly allows sodium to rush back in, creating an electrical pulse that travels down the axon. This is how your brain communicates with itself and with the rest of your body. Every thought, every sensation, every movement starts with ion gradients. But maintaining those gradients requires energy in the form of ATP and functioning ion pumps, which are proteins. Under extreme pressure, the pumps don't work as well. They slow down, they jam, the gradients begin to equalize. Sodium leaks in, potassium leaks out. The cell loses its ability to generate electrical signals. Neurons stop firing, muscles stop contracting. Your heart, which depends on precisely timed electrical impulses to coordinate its contractions, begins to fail. Cell membranes themselves are also vulnerable. Membranes are made of lipids, fat molecules arranged in a double layer. They're fluid, flexible, and selectively permeable, meaning they let some things through and keep others out. But under high pressure, lipids compress. Proteins embedded in the membrane, which control what enters and exits the cell, get squeezed and distorted. They stop functioning properly. Deep-sea organisms adjust their membrane composition to compensate. They incorporate more unsaturated fats, which remain fluid even under pressure and cold temperatures. It's the same principle behind why fish oil is liquid at room temperature, while beef fat is solid. The degree of saturation determines fluidity. Your cells don't have that flexibility. Your membranes are optimized for surface conditions, and under deep-sea pressure, they stiffen, crack, and leak. Then there's the issue of gas solubility. Under high pressure, gases dissolve more readily in liquids, nitrogen, which makes up about 78% of the air you breathe, becomes a problem. At depth, nitrogen dissolves into your blood and tissues in quantities that would never occur at the surface. If you were to ascend too quickly, that dissolved nitrogen would come out of solution, forming bubbles in your bloodstream and tissues. This is decompression sickness, also known as the bends, and it's excruciatingly painful and often fatal. But even staying at depth, the excess nitrogen affects your brain. It causes nitrogen narcosis, a state of altered consciousness similar to being drunk. Divers call it rapture of the deep. Your judgment becomes impaired. You feel euphoric, detached, unconcerned about danger. Some divers have removed their regulators underwater, convinced they could breathe water. Others have simply drifted away into the darkness, happy and confused, until they ran out of air. Nitrogen narcosis would cloud your mind long before the isolation and sensory deprivation finish the job. At the cellular level, you're not just fighting one problem, you're fighting dozens. Proteins denaturing, membranes stiffening, ion gradients collapsing, enzymes failing, nitrogen dissolving into your tissues and scrambling your brain chemistry. Every system is under siege simultaneously, and there's no backup plan, no redundancy, no way to adapt fast enough. Your cells were built for the surface, and the deep ocean is systematically dismantling them, molecule by molecule. But even if your cellular machinery could somehow hold together, there's still the problem of energy. Because keeping all of this running requires fuel, and down here you're burning through it faster than you ever could replace it. Your cells are breaking down, your proteins are denaturing, your membranes are failing, but beneath all of that, there's an even more fundamental problem. You're running out of energy. Not the motivational kind, not willpower or determination, actual biochemical energy. The ATP that powers every single process in your body is becoming harder and harder to produce, and without it, you're not just tired, you're shutting down at the most basic level. Let's talk about metabolism. It's a word people throw around casually, usually in the context of weight loss or diet, but metabolism is so much more than that. It's the sum total of every chemical reaction happening in your body at any given moment, breaking down food into usable components, building new proteins, repairing damaged DNA, sending electrical signals through your nerves, contracting your muscles, pumping ions across membranes. All of it requires energy, and that energy comes from ATP. ATP, adenosine triphosphate, is the universal energy currency of life. Think of it like a rechargeable battery. When your cells need energy, they break a phosphate bond in ATP, converting it to ADP, adenosine diphosphate, and releasing energy in the process. That energy powers whatever work the cell needs to do. Then, your mitochondria take that ADP and recharge it back to ATP using energy extracted from the food you eat. It's a continuous cycle, happening billions of times per second across trillions of cells. On land, assuming you're eating regularly and breathing normally, this system works beautifully. Your mitochondria use a process called aerobic respiration. They take glucose and oxygen and, through a series of elegant chemical reactions, produce ATP, water, and carbon dioxide. It's efficient. One molecule of glucose can yield up to 38 molecules of ATP under ideal conditions. Your body is constantly producing and consuming ATP at a staggering rate. An average adult generates and uses roughly their own body weight in ATP every single day. It's being recycled constantly, but the machinery has to keep running. Now, let's put you in the deep ocean and watch what happens to this system. First, you're cold. Temperature affects the rate of chemical reactions. For every 10 degrees Celsius drop in temperature, most biochemical reactions slow down by about half. That's a rough estimate, but it gives you an idea. Your body temperature, if it hasn't already plummeted into hypothermia, is struggling to stay at 37 degrees in water that's hovering around 1 or 2 degrees. Your cells are cold. Your enzymes are sluggish. The reactions that produce ATP are slowing down. But your energy demands haven't decreased. In fact, they've increased. You're shivering, which is your muscles contracting rapidly to generate heat. Shivering burns calories at an extraordinary rate, sometimes increasing your metabolic rate by 4 or 5 times. You're also under physical and psychological stress, which triggers the release of hormones like cortisol and adrenaline. These hormones tell your body to mobilize energy stores, to prepare for action. But there's no action you can take. There's nothing to fight, nowhere to run. You're just burning through energy with no way to replace it. And remember, you're not eating. There's no food down here, or at least nothing you can digest. So your body is cannibalizing itself, breaking down fat and eventually muscle tissue to produce glucose. But that process, called gluconeogenesis, also requires energy. You're spending ATP to make the fuel you need to make ATP. It's a losing game, and you're hemorrhaging energy with every passing hour. Now add oxygen scarcity into the equation. Aerobic respiration, the efficient process that produces 38 ATP per glucose molecule, requires oxygen. Without it, your cells switch to anaerobic respiration, also known as fermentation. This process produces only 2 ATP per glucose molecule, 2 versus 38. It's not even close. You're suddenly running on fumes, getting less than 6% of the energy you'd normally extract from the same amount of fuel. Anaerobic respiration also produces lactic acid as a byproduct. That's what causes the burning sensation in your muscles when you sprint or lift weights to exhaustion. A little lactic acid is manageable. Your body can buffer it, clear it out. But sustained anaerobic metabolism floods your tissues with lactic acid. Your blood pH drops, becoming more acidic. This is called metabolic acidosis, and it's dangerous. Enzymes don't function well outside a narrow pH range. Your cells, already struggling, now have to deal with an increasingly toxic internal environment. Your heart, which never stops working, is one of the most energy-hungry organs in your body. It beats roughly 100,000 times per day under normal conditions, and every single beat requires ATP. When ATP production drops, your heart has to choose. Does it keep beating at the same rate and risk running out of energy entirely? Or does it slow down, conserving what little ATP is left? Even if that means less oxygen delivery to the rest of your body. There's no good answer. Either way, you're in trouble. Your brain is in a similar bind. It consumes about 20% of your total energy budget despite being only 2% of your body mass. Neurons are expensive to run. They're constantly pumping ions, maintaining gradients, firing action potentials. When ATP runs low, neurons start to fail. They can't maintain their resting potential. They can't fire properly. Your thoughts become slow, fragmented, confused. You lose the ability to focus, to plan, to react. Consciousness itself is an energy-intensive process, and without sufficient ATP, it flickers and fades. Deep-sea creatures avoid this metabolic crisis by adopting an entirely different lifestyle. They're ectothermic, meaning their body temperature matches their environment. They don't waste energy generating heat. They're also incredibly slow. Many deep-sea fish barely move, drifting with the current or lying motionless on the seafloor for hours at a time. Their metabolic rates are a fraction of what yours is. They don't need much energy because they don't do much. It's a strategy of extreme conservation. Some deep-sea animals can survive for weeks or even months between meals. When they do eat, they digest slowly, extracting every possible calorie from their prey. Their entire biology is built around efficiency, around making the most of scarce resources. They've turned scarcity into an advantage by simply needing less. You can't do that. You're warm-blooded, which means you're locked into a high-energy lifestyle. You have to maintain your body temperature. You have to keep your brain running at full capacity. You have to keep your heart beating, your lungs breathing, your immune system functioning. All of that costs energy. And in the deep ocean, you're generating less energy while simultaneously needing more. It's an impossible equation. Your mitochondria, those tiny powerhouses, are working overtime and producing almost nothing. Your ATP levels are plummeting. Your cells are rationing what little energy they have left, prioritizing only the most critical functions. Non-essential processes are shut down. Digestion stops. Immune function weakens. Even your ability to think clearly is sacrificed to keep your heart beating just a little longer. But it's not enough. Eventually, the energy runs out completely. Your cells can't pump ions anymore. They can't repair damage. They can't maintain their structure. One by one, they begin to die. And when enough of them die, tissues fail, organs shut down, and you, the conscious being who's been trying so hard to survive, finally slip away into the cold and the dark. But even before that final moment, there's something else unraveling, something you might not even notice until it's too late. Your ability to perceive the world around you. You're cold, starving, oxygen deprived, and running on empty. But there's something else happening that makes all of this even worse. You're losing your ability to sense the world. Your eyes, ears, nose, skin, the entire network of sensory organs that connect you to your environment, they're all failing. And without them, you're not just physically adrift, you're cognitively untethered, disconnected from reality itself. Humans are heavily reliant on vision. Roughly 80% of the information your brain processes comes through your eyes. When you walk into a room, you instantly assess its size, identify objects, recognize faces, detect movement. You do this without thinking because your visual system is extraordinarily sophisticated. Light enters your eyes, strikes the retina, and photoreceptor cells convert that light into electrical signals. Those signals travel through the optic nerve to your brain, where they're processed, interpreted, and integrated into a coherent picture of the world. But in the deep ocean, there's no light. We've talked about this already. The darkness is absolute. Your eyes are wide open, pupils fully dilated, rods and cones desperately searching for photons and finding nothing, zero input. Your visual cortex, the part of your brain dedicated to processing sight, is essentially unemployed. And when a part of your brain stops receiving input, strange things start to happen. It doesn't just go quiet. It starts generating its own activity. You see things that aren't there. Shapes, colors, faces. Your brain is trying to make sense of the void by filling it with memories, patterns, anything it can pull from storage. Now, let's talk about hearing. Sound travels differently in water than it does in air. It moves faster, about 4 times faster, because water is denser, but it also behaves unpredictably. Temperature layers, salinity gradients, and pressure changes can bend sound waves, creating zones where sound is amplified and others where it's muffled or completely absent. The deep ocean is mostly silent, but not entirely. There are occasional clicks from hunting sperm whales, the low rumble of tectonic activity, the distant groan of shifting ice. But these sounds are rare, sporadic, and often distorted beyond recognition. Your ears are designed for air. The eardrum vibrates in response to sound waves traveling through air, and those vibrations are transmitted through 3 tiny bones, the malleus, incus, and stapes, to the inner ear, where they're converted into electrical signals underwater. Sound waves can bypass the eardrum entirely, traveling through the bones of your skull directly to the inner ear. This is called bone conduction, and it creates a strange, muffled sensation. You hear things, but they don't sound normal. Directionality is lost. You can't tell where a sound is coming from. Everything feels like it's inside your head. And remember, your eardrums are likely ruptured from the pressure. Cold seawater has flooded your middle ear. Your hearing is compromised, distorted, and unreliable. The few sounds that do reach you are warped, unidentifiable. Your brain can't make sense of them. Another sensory channel is failing. What about smell and taste? On land, these senses help you identify food, detect danger, and navigate your environment. You smell smoke and know there's a fire. You taste something bitter and know it might be poisonous. But underwater, especially in the deep ocean, these senses are almost useless. Humans don't have specialized chemoreceptors for detecting dissolved chemicals in water. You can't smell underwater in any meaningful way, and taste requires molecules to dissolve on your tongue, which isn't happening when your mouth is flooded with cold, salty seawater. Deep-sea creatures, on the other hand, rely heavily on chemical sensing. Many species have evolved extraordinary abilities to detect pheromones, metabolic byproducts, and other chemical signals dissolved in the water. Sharks can detect blood at concentrations as low as 1 part per million. Hagfish navigate primarily by smell, using specialized nostrils to follow scent trails across the ocean floor. It's a completely different sensory world, one you have no access to. Touch is your last remaining sense, and even that is compromised. Your skin is covered with mechanoreceptors, nerve endings that detect pressure, temperature, pain, and texture. But in the deep ocean, everything feels the same. The water is uniformly cold, uniformly dense, uniformly pressing against every inch of your body. There's no variation, no texture, nothing to distinguish one moment from the next. You might as well be wrapped in a sensory deprivation suit. You can feel the water, but it tells you nothing. Your sense of balance, controlled by your vestibular system in your inner ear, is also disoriented. On land, gravity provides a constant downward pull. You know instinctively which way is up. But underwater, especially in total darkness, that sense of orientation dissolves. You're neutrally buoyant, floating in three-dimensional space with no reference points. Your vestibular system detects acceleration and rotation, but without visual or tactile cues to confirm what it's sensing, your brain becomes confused. You might feel like you're spinning when you're not, or stationary when you're drifting. Astronauts experience something similar in zero gravity. It's deeply disorienting, and it contributes to nausea, vertigo, and spatial confusion. All of these sensory failures compound each other. Your brain depends on multiple streams of information to build an accurate model of reality. Vision tells you one thing, hearing confirms it, touch adds detail, balance keeps you oriented. When all of those streams are cut off or distorted, your brain struggles to construct a coherent picture. You lose your sense of self in space. You can't tell if you're moving or still, right side up or upside down, alone or surrounded by something you can't see. This is called sensory deprivation, and it has profound psychological effects. Studies from the 1950s and 60s, where subjects were placed in dark, silent tanks of water, showed that people begin hallucinating within hours. They reported seeing lights, hearing voices, feeling phantom touches. Some experienced vivid, dreamlike states that felt more real than reality. Others became paranoid, anxious, convinced they were being watched or followed. A few lost track of time entirely, unable to tell if minutes or hours had passed. And those were controlled experiments. Safe environments, subjects knew they could leave whenever they wanted. You don't have that option. You're trapped in sensory deprivation with no escape, no reassurance, no end in sight. Your brain, starved of input and desperate for stimulation, would create its own reality, and you'd have no way to distinguish between what's real and what's imagined. Deep-sea creatures navigate this sensory void using adaptations you simply don't have. Many fish have lateral lines, specialized organs that detect vibrations and pressure changes in the water. They can sense the movement of prey or predators from meters away, even in complete darkness. Some species use electroreception, detecting the weak electrical fields generated by muscle contractions in other animals. Sharks are famous for this. They have organs called ampullae of Lorenzini that can detect electrical signals as faint as 1/1000th of a volt. Others rely on bioluminescence, not just to produce light, but to detect it. Their eyes are tuned to the specific wavelengths of light emitted by other deep-sea creatures. They can see flashes and glows that would be invisible to you even if your eyes were functioning. They've built entire communication systems, hunting strategies, and mating rituals around this dim, flickering language of light. But you're blind to all of it. You can't detect electrical fields. You can't sense pressure waves. You can't see bioluminescence. You're sensory blind in a world that operates on senses you don't possess. And the senses you do have, the ones you've relied on your entire life, have been stripped away. You're floating in nothingness, perceiving nothing, becoming nothing, and in that void, you might not even notice the creatures drifting past you in the dark. You're drifting through the darkness, blind and disoriented, your senses failing one by one, and all around you, just beyond your perception, life continues. Strange life, alien life, creatures so perfectly adapted to this environment that they seem designed by a mind that understood pressure, cold, and darkness better than physics itself. These are your neighbors in the abyss, and they're nothing like anything you've ever seen. Female anglerfish, the larger of the species, carry a modified dorsal spine that extends forward over their head like a fishing rod. At the tip of this spine is a bulbous lure called an esker, filled with bioluminescent bacteria. The bacteria glow with a soft, eerie light, and the anglerfish dangles this lure in front of its mouth, sitting perfectly still in the darkness, waiting. Small fish and crustaceans, drawn to the only light they've seen in hours or days, swim closer to investigate, and when they get close enough, the anglerfish strikes with sudden, explosive speed, engulfing its prey in jaws lined with needle-sharp teeth that angle backward, making escape impossible. The anglerfish's mouth is disproportionately large. Its jaw can unhinge, and its stomach can expand to hold prey larger than the fish itself. This is necessary because meals are rare. An anglerfish might go weeks or months without encountering food, so when it does, it needs to eat as much as possible. Its body is soft, gelatinous, with minimal bone structure to reduce weight and conserve energy. It drifts through the water with almost no effort, a living trap suspended in the void. Then there's the gulper eel, also known as the pelican eel, a creature that looks like it was stretched out and forgotten. Its body is long, whip-like, and its mouth is enormous, hinged like a pelican's beak. The gulper eel can open its jaws to nearly 90 degrees, creating a cavernous space that allows it to swallow prey much larger than itself. Like the anglerfish, it has a bioluminescent lure at the tip of its tail, which it waves to attract smaller fish. When something approaches, the eel whips around with surprising speed and engulfs it whole. Despite its fearsome appearance, the gulper eel is relatively harmless to anything human-sized. It's small, rarely exceeding 1 meter in length, and it has no interest in prey it can't swallow. Its entire survival strategy revolves around efficiency, minimal movement, minimal energy expenditure, maximum reward when opportunity strikes. It's patience embodied in flesh. Giant isopods are another deep-sea marvel. Imagine a pillbug, the little grey creature you might find under a rock in your garden. Now scale it up to the size of a football. That's a giant isopod. These crustaceans can grow up to 50 centimeters in length, and they scuttle across the ocean floor on 14 legs, scavenging for anything edible. They eat dead whales, fish carcasses, marine snow, anything organic that drifts down from above. Their exoskeletons are thick and armored, protecting them from predators and pressure alike. Giant isopods have an extraordinary ability to survive without food. Some have been observed in captivity going over 5 years without eating. 5 years. They enter a state of near-total metabolic shutdown, conserving every molecule of energy until food becomes available again. When they do eat, they gorge themselves, sometimes consuming so much that they can barely move. It's feast or famine taken to an extreme. The vampire squid, despite its ominous name, is not a predator. It's a gentle drifter, a gelatinous creature with webbing between its arms that gives it a cloak-like appearance. When threatened, it can turn itself inside out, exposing rows of fleshy spines that make it look larger and less appetizing. Its eyes are enormous relative to its body size, the largest eye-to-body ratio of any animal on Earth. Those eyes gather every available photon of bioluminescent light, allowing the vampire squid to navigate and detect predators in near-total darkness. It feeds on marine snow, using sticky filaments to collect falling particles. Once enough material has accumulated on the filaments, the squid reels them in and scrapes the food off with its arms. It's a slow, passive feeding strategy, but it works. The vampire squid isn't hunting, it's harvesting. And in an environment where active hunting costs too much energy, harvesting is the better strategy. Then there are the jellyfish, drifting through the abyss like ghosts. Some deep-sea jellies are bioluminescent, pulsing with rhythmic light as they move. Others are transparent, nearly invisible even when illuminated. They have no brain, no centralized nervous system, just a diffuse network of nerve cells that coordinate basic functions. They don't think. They don't plan. They simply exist, responding to stimuli with reflexive grace. Their bodies are more than 95% water, which makes them neutrally buoyant and immune to pressure damage. They're not fighting the environment, they are the environment. Barrel-eye fish have some of the strangest anatomy in the ocean. Their heads are transparent, not translucent, fully transparent. You can see through the dome of their skull directly into the brain cavity, where two tubular eyes point upward. These eyes are fixed in place, but the fish can rotate them forward to look ahead when needed. The barrel eye hovers in the water column, staring upward, watching for the silhouettes of prey passing between itself and the faint light filtering down from far above. It's a patient hunter, motionless for hours, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. None of these creatures are monsters. They're not evil or malicious. They're survivors, finely tuned by evolution to exploit a niche that nothing else can. They don't waste energy on speed, on aggression, on territoriality. They conserve, they wait, they adapt. And in doing so, they've become some of the most successful organisms on the planet. The deep ocean covers more than half of Earth's surface, and these creatures dominate it. But here's the thing. They're not interested in you. You're not prey. You're not a threat. You're just another piece of organic matter drifting through their territory, and most of them would ignore you entirely. An anglerfish wouldn't attack something your size. A gulper eel couldn't swallow you. A giant isopod might nibble at you if you were already dead. But while you're alive and moving, you're too large, too strange, too energetically expensive to bother with. The deep ocean's creatures are perfectly adapted to their world, but that world is small, cold, and resource scarce. They've sacrificed speed, size, and aggression in favor of efficiency. They're not apex predators in the traditional sense. They're opportunists, specialists, survivors, and in their presence, you're not in danger from teeth or venom. You're in danger from the simple fact that you don't belong here. You're a surface creature in a place with no surface. A warm-blooded animal in freezing water. A being that needs light, air, and abundant food in a realm that offers none of those things. The creatures around you aren't killing you. The ocean itself is doing that just fine. Let's imagine, just for a moment, that rescue is possible. A submersible finds you somehow, against all odds. You're barely conscious, hypothermic, oxygen-deprived, but alive. They pull you inside, seal the hatch, and begin the ascent. You're saved, right? Not quite, because now you face a different problem, one just as deadly as anything you've encountered so far. You can't go up, at least not quickly. The ocean has made you a prisoner not just of depth, but of biology itself. When you descend into the ocean, pressure increases. We've talked about this. Every 10 meters adds another atmosphere of pressure, and as pressure increases, gases dissolve more readily into liquids. This is a basic principle of chemistry, described by something called Henry's law. The amount of gas that dissolves in a liquid is directly proportional to the pressure of that gas above the liquid. At sea level, a certain amount of nitrogen from the air you breathe dissolves into your blood and tissues. It's always there, in equilibrium, causing no problems. But at depth, under hundreds of atmospheres of pressure, far more nitrogen dissolves into your bloodstream. Your tissues become saturated with it. Nitrogen is inert. It doesn't participate in metabolism. It just sits there, dissolved, waiting. And as long as the pressure remains high, it stays dissolved. But if you ascend too quickly, if the pressure drops suddenly, that dissolved nitrogen comes out of solution. It forms bubbles, and those bubbles can kill you. This is decompression sickness, commonly known as the bends. The name comes from the contorted posture victims often adopt, bending over in pain as bubbles form in their joints, muscles, and tissues. Nitrogen bubbles are not supposed to be in your body. They're not like the tiny, harmless bubbles in carbonated water. These bubbles lodge in joints, causing intense pain. They block blood vessels, cutting off oxygen supply to tissues. They can form in the spinal cord, causing paralysis. They can reach the brain, causing strokes, seizures, loss of consciousness. The severity depends on how deep you were and how fast you ascended. A diver who's been at 30 meters for an hour needs to ascend slowly, with stops at specific depths to allow nitrogen to off-gas gradually from their tissues. These are called decompression stops, and they're calculated carefully based on dive tables or computers. Skip them, and you risk the bends. But you've been at 4,000 meters. 4,000 meters. The amount of nitrogen dissolved in your tissues is astronomical. The decompression time required would be measured not in minutes, but in days, maybe weeks. Deep-sea diving operations, like those used in offshore oil drilling, use saturation diving. Divers live in pressurized chambers on the surface, kept at the same pressure as their working depth. They're transported to and from the worksite in pressurized bells. When their job is done, they undergo decompression in the chamber, slowly reducing pressure over days or even weeks. It's the only way to safely return from extreme depths. But you don't have a pressurized chamber. You don't have days. You're in a submersible, ascending at a steady rate, and the pressure is dropping fast. Within minutes of starting the ascent, you'd feel the first symptoms. A tingling sensation in your limbs, itching, a vague discomfort in your joints. Then the pain starts. Sharp, stabbing pain in your shoulders, elbows, knees, hips. The bends typically affect the joints first because nitrogen bubbles tend to form in areas with poor circulation. The pain is excruciating, and it only gets worse as more bubbles form. If bubbles reach your lungs, you develop something called the chokes. You can't breathe. You cough, gasp, feel like you're suffocating. Bubbles in the pulmonary circulation block gas exchange. Your blood can't pick up oxygen. Your lips turn blue. Your heart races, trying to compensate. But there's nothing it can do. The bubbles are physical obstructions, and they're not going anywhere. Bubbles in the central nervous system are the most dangerous. They cause neurological decompression sickness, which can manifest as dizziness, confusion, visual disturbances, paralysis, seizures, or unconsciousness. Bubbles in the brain block blood flow to neurons, causing strokes. Bubbles in the spinal cord compress nerves, cutting off signals to and from the rest of your body. You might lose sensation in your legs, lose bladder control, lose the ability to move, and these effects can be permanent, even if you survive. The only treatment for severe decompression sickness is recompression therapy. You're placed in a hyperbaric chamber where pressure is increased again, forcing the bubbles back into solution. Then, pressure is decreased gradually, slowly, over hours, giving your body time to off-gas the nitrogen safely. It's effective if administered quickly, but delay treatment and the damage becomes irreversible. tissues die, nerves are destroyed. Even with treatment, some divers never fully recover. Deep-sea creatures don't have this problem, but not because they're immune to pressure changes. They're not. If you bring a deep-sea fish to the surface too quickly, it dies. But it doesn't die from the bends. It dies because its biology is calibrated for high pressure. Remember those piezolites, the molecules that stabilize proteins under pressure? At low pressure, they destabilize proteins in the opposite direction. The fish's cellular machinery falls apart. Its enzymes stop working. In some cases, gases dissolved in the fish's tissues expand, causing its swim bladder to rupture or its eyes to bulge out of their sockets. It's a grotesque, rapid death. Deep-sea organisms are locked into their depth ranges. A fish that lives at 4,000 meters can't survive at 3,000 meters. It can't survive at 2,000 meters, and it certainly can't survive at the surface. It's adapted so specifically to its niche that any deviation is fatal. Evolution has made it exquisitely good at one thing: surviving at depth, and utterly incapable of anything else. You're in a similar trap, just reversed. You're a surface creature. You're adapted for one atmosphere of pressure, for oxygen-rich air, for warmth and light and abundant food. Take you to the deep ocean, and you die. But even if you somehow survive down there, you couldn't come back, not quickly, not safely. The nitrogen in your tissues has turned your blood into a ticking time bomb. Ascend too fast, and the bubbles form. Stay too long, and you run out of oxygen, warmth, energy. There's no good option. You're caught between two lethal choices. The ocean has layers, and each layer is its own world with its own rules. Cross between them too quickly, and biology rebels. Humans have managed to visit the deepest parts of the ocean, the Mariana Trench at nearly 11,000 meters, but only in specialized submersibles with life support systems, pressure hulls, and carefully controlled ascents. Even then, the journey takes hours. The descent, the time at depth, the ascent, all of it is meticulously planned to avoid catastrophic failure. But you don't have that luxury. You're unprotected, unsupported, trapped in a vertical prison where up means death, and down means death, and staying still means death. The ocean doesn't offer escape routes. It offers only choices between different kinds of failure. And even if you could somehow bypass the bends, even if your body could tolerate rapid decompression, you'd still be facing another problem. Because the deep ocean isn't just physically hostile, it's chemically hostile. And in some places, it's downright toxic. The deep ocean isn't uniform. It's not just a vast expanse of cold, dark water stretching endlessly in all directions. There are zones, pockets, regions where the chemistry changes dramatically, and in some of those places, the water itself becomes poisonous. Not metaphorically, literally toxic. These are the hydrothermal vents, the cold seeps, the oxygen minimum zones, and if you drift into one of them, you're facing a threat your body has absolutely no defense against. Let's start with hydrothermal vents. These are cracks in the ocean floor where seawater seeps down into the Earth's crust, gets superheated by magma chambers below, and then erupts back out in plumes of mineral-rich water. The water coming out of these vents can reach temperatures of 400 degrees Celsius. That's hot enough to melt lead. It doesn't boil because the pressure at depth is so high that water remains liquid even at these extreme temperatures. But if you encountered a vent, if you drifted too close to one of these underwater geysers, you'd be scalded instantly. Your skin would blister, peel, and char. The proteins in your tissues would denature immediately. You'd be cooked alive in seconds. But the heat isn't even the worst part. The water coming out of hydrothermal vents is loaded with dissolved minerals and chemicals, sulfur compounds, heavy metals like iron, copper, zinc, and manganese, and most dangerously, hydrogen sulfide. Hydrogen sulfide is a gas that smells like rotten eggs at low concentrations, but at high concentrations, it's odorless because it paralyzes your olfactory nerves. It interferes with cellular respiration by binding to an enzyme called cytochrome C oxidase, which is part of the electron transport chain in your mitochondria. Without that enzyme, your cells can't produce ATP. Even if they have oxygen, you suffocate at the cellular level. Hydrogen sulfide poisoning happens fast. At concentrations above 700 parts per million, a single breath can cause immediate collapse and death. You lose consciousness within seconds. Your heart stops. There's no time to react, no gradual build-up of symptoms. One moment you're aware, the next you're gone. And near hydrothermal vents, hydrogen sulfide concentrations can be far higher than 700 parts per million. Strangely, life thrives around these vents, but not the kind of life you're familiar with. These ecosystems are built on chemosynthesis, not photosynthesis. Bacteria near the vents use the chemical energy from hydrogen sulfide and other compounds to produce organic molecules, essentially doing what plants do with sunlight, but with toxic chemicals instead. These bacteria form the base of a food chain that includes tube worms, clams, shrimp, and crabs. All of them have evolved extraordinary adaptations to survive in an environment saturated with poison. Tube worms, for example, have no mouth, no digestive system, no way to eat in the traditional sense. Instead, they have a specialized organ filled with chemosynthetic bacteria. The worms absorb hydrogen sulfide and oxygen from the water and deliver them to the bacteria, which convert those chemicals into nutrients. The worms live off the bacteria, and the bacteria live off the chemicals. It's a symbiotic relationship that allows life to flourish in a place that should be sterile and dead. But you don't have chemosynthetic bacteria. You can't metabolize hydrogen sulfide. You can't extract energy from heavy metals. Your cells are built to run on glucose and oxygen and nothing else. Exposure to the chemicals around a hydrothermal vent would shut down your metabolism completely. Your mitochondria would stop working. Your neurons would stop firing. You'd die not from heat or pressure or starvation, but from simple chemical incompatibility. Cold seeps are another toxic zone, though less dramatic than vents. These are areas where methane and other hydrocarbons seep up from beneath the ocean floor. Methane is a simple molecule, one carbon atom bonded to 4 hydrogen atoms. In the right conditions, it's flammable, which is why it's used as natural gas. But underwater, under pressure, methane doesn't burn. It just accumulates, sometimes forming solid structures called methane hydrates, which look like ice but are actually frozen methane trapped in a lattice of water molecules. Methane itself isn't directly toxic to humans in the way hydrogen sulfide is, but it displaces oxygen. In areas with high methane concentrations, dissolved oxygen levels drop to nearly zero. Fish and other marine life avoid these zones because they'd suffocate. You'd have the same problem. Even if you somehow had access to breathable air, if you were submerged in methane-saturated water, your skin would absorb methane while losing heat even faster than normal. Methane is a greenhouse gas, but at the molecular level, it doesn't insulate. It conducts heat away. You'd freeze faster in methane-rich water than in normal seawater. Then there are the oxygen minimum zones, also called dead zones. These are layers of water, usually between 200 and 1,000 meters deep, where oxygen concentrations drop to less than 2 milligrams per liter. For comparison, most marine life needs at least 4 to 6 milligrams per liter to survive. Below 2 milligrams, even hardy fish struggle. Below 1 milligram, almost nothing can live except specialized bacteria and a few invertebrates. Oxygen minimum zones form in areas where organic matter from the surface sinks and decomposes. Bacteria consume the oxygen during decomposition, and if water circulation is poor, that oxygen isn't replaced. The zone becomes hypoxic, starved of oxygen, hostile to most life. If you drifted into one of these zones, you'd be in an environment where even the water itself can't support aerobic life. Your body, already struggling to extract oxygen from cold, deep water, would find even less available. You'd asphyxiate faster, your cells starving for oxygen that simply isn't there. Heavy metals are another silent threat. The deep ocean floor is littered with manganese nodules, potato-sized lumps of metal ore that form over millions of years. These nodules contain not just manganese, but also nickel, cobalt, copper, and other heavy metals. In solid form, they're harmless. But in solution, dissolved in the water around vents or seeps, heavy metals are toxic. They interfere with enzyme function, disrupt cellular membranes, and accumulate in tissues over time. Mercury is particularly insidious. It bioaccumulates, meaning it concentrates as it moves up the food chain. A small fish absorbs a little mercury from the water. A larger fish eats many small fish and accumulates more mercury. A tuna or swordfish at the top of the food chain can have mercury concentrations thousands of times higher than the surrounding water. Humans are warned not to eat too much of these fish because mercury poisoning causes neurological damage, tremors, memory loss, and cognitive decline. In the deep ocean, mercury and other heavy metals are present in concentrations that vary depending on location. Near vents and mineral deposits, levels can be surprisingly high. Your body has some ability to process and eliminate heavy metals, but it's limited. Prolonged exposure, which is exactly what you'd face if stranded in the deep ocean, would lead to accumulation. Your kidneys would fail trying to filter the metals out. Your liver would be overwhelmed. Your nervous system would begin to deteriorate. It's a slow poisoning, but it's inevitable. Deep-sea organisms have adapted to these chemical challenges in remarkable ways. Some species produce proteins that bind heavy metals and sequester them in non-toxic forms. Others have cell membranes with specialized lipid compositions that resist chemical damage. Vent organisms can tolerate temperatures, pressures, and chemical concentrations that would instantly kill surface creatures. They're not just surviving, they're thriving, exploiting an energy source that nothing else can access. But you're not adapted. Your biochemistry is tuned for the surface world, where water is relatively pure, where oxygen is abundant, where toxic chemicals are rare or diluted. Drop you into a vent field or a methane seep, and your body wouldn't even recognize the threat until it was too late. You'd breathe in hydrogen sulfide and collapse. You'd absorb heavy metals and slowly deteriorate. You'd drift into an oxygen minimum zone and asphyxiate without understanding why. The deep ocean isn't just physically hostile, it's chemically alien. And that brings us to the final reckoning, the timeline. How long would you actually last? We've talked about all the ways the deep ocean would kill you: the pressure, the darkness, the cold, the starvation, the isolation, the oxygen deprivation, the cellular breakdown, the metabolic collapse, the sensory failure, the toxic chemicals. But let's put it all together now. Let's walk through the timeline. If you were somehow transported, unprotected, to the abyssal plains at 4,000 meters, how long would you actually survive? The answer might surprise you, because some systems fail fast while others linger, and the order matters. Let's start at the moment of arrival. You appear suddenly at 4,000 meters depth. The pressure hits you first. 400 atmospheres pressing in from all sides. Within seconds, your lungs collapse. The air inside them is compressed to a fraction of its original volume. Your ribcage can't withstand the force. Ribs crack. Your eardrums rupture immediately. Cold seawater floods your middle ear. Your sinuses hemorrhage, filling with blood. This all happens in the first 5 to 10 seconds. You're conscious, but in immediate, overwhelming pain. At the same time, the cold strikes. Water at 1 to 2 degrees Celsius pulls heat from your body at a catastrophic rate. Your skin temperature drops within seconds. Blood vessels in your extremities constrict violently, pulling blood toward your core. Your fingers and toes go numb almost instantly. You start shivering, an involuntary response, your muscles contracting rapidly to generate heat, but the shivering burns through energy you don't have, and it's not enough. Not nearly enough. Your core temperature begins to drop. Within the first minute, you've lost a degree or more. 37 degrees becomes 36, then 35. Now let's talk about breathing, or rather, the lack of it. Your lungs are collapsed, filled with water, or compressed to the point of uselessness. You can't inhale, you can't exhale. You're holding whatever breath you had when you arrived, and that breath is rapidly running out of oxygen. Your body is still burning through oxygen at a normal rate, maybe faster because of the stress and the shivering. Within 60 to 90 seconds, you've depleted the oxygen in your blood. Your brain, the most oxygen-hungry organ, starts to suffer first. Hypoxia, oxygen deprivation, causes confusion, panic, and a desperate, overwhelming urge to breathe. You might try to inhale, instinctively, reflexively, but there's no air, only water. If you do inhale, seawater floods into your throat, your trachea, whatever's left of your lungs. The salt content, 3.5%, is far higher than your body's fluids. It causes immediate damage to the delicate tissues of your respiratory system. You're drowning, but you're also being crushed, frozen, and suffocated all at once. At the 2-minute mark, you're in severe hypoxia. Your vision narrows, tunnel vision, then blackness. You lose consciousness. Your brain, starved of oxygen, begins shutting down non-essential functions to preserve the core systems. But there's nothing to preserve. No oxygen is coming. Your neurons start dying. Brain damage begins. It's irreversible. Even if you were somehow rescued at this point, the damage is done. Your heart is still beating, but erratically. Without it, they can't maintain their electrical rhythm. Your heartbeat becomes irregular, fluttering, weak. Ventricular fibrillation might set in, where the heart quivers uselessly instead of pumping. Or it might just slow down, beat by beat, until it stops entirely. Cardiac arrest usually occurs within 3 to 5 minutes of oxygen deprivation. So, at the 5-minute mark, you're clinically dead. No heartbeat, no brain activity, no oxygen delivery. But your cells don't die all at once. They die gradually, in stages, depending on how long they can survive without fresh oxygen and nutrients. Neurons die first, within 4 to 6 minutes. Cardiac cells last a bit longer, maybe 10 to 15 minutes. Kidney and liver cells can survive for up to an hour or more before necrosis, cell death, becomes irreversible. Your body is shutting down in waves, system by system, organ by organ. But let's imagine a different scenario. Let's say you somehow had a way to breathe, a rebreather, a magical air supply, something that kept oxygen flowing to your lungs despite the pressure. You're still in serious trouble, but the timeline changes. Now, instead of dying in minutes, you're dying in hours. Hypothermia becomes the primary threat. At 35 degrees Celsius, you're in mild hypothermia. You're shivering violently, confused, clumsy. Within 30 minutes, your core temperature drops to 34 degrees. Moderate hypothermia. Shivering stops. Your muscles are exhausted. You're drowsy, apathetic. Your thinking is slow, fragmented. You might start making irrational decisions, or no decisions at all. At 1 hour, you're at 32 degrees or lower. Severe hypothermia. Your heart rhythm is dangerously irregular. Your breathing is shallow. You're barely conscious. And here's where paradoxical undressing might occur. Your brain, confused and oxygen-starved, sends false signals. You feel hot. You might try to remove clothing, if you had any. It's a cruel trick your dying brain plays on you. By the 2-hour mark, you're in profound hypothermia, core temperature below 30 degrees, your pupils are fixed, your pulse is barely detectable. Even if you were rescued at this point and brought to a hospital, your chances of survival are slim. The cold has damaged your organs, your tissues, your cells. Rewarming can cause complications, arrhythmias, shock. Many hypothermia victims die during or after rewarming. Now, let's add starvation to the mix. If, by some miracle, you could breathe and stay warm, you'd still face energy depletion. In cold water, your body burns 3,000 to 4,000 calories per day just maintaining temperature and basic functions. Without food, you're running on stored reserves. Glycogen lasts about 24 hours. Then your body turns to fat, which might last a few weeks if you're well nourished to start. After that, muscle and organ tissue. You'd weaken progressively, losing the ability to move, to think clearly, to care. Starvation is a slow death, taking weeks, but combined with cold and stress, it accelerates. The psychological timeline is harder to measure, but equally important. Sensory deprivation, isolation, and the knowledge of your situation would cause rapid mental deterioration. Within hours, you'd be hallucinating. Within days, assuming you somehow survived that long, you'd be delusional, detached from reality. Your mind would fracture under the weight of absolute darkness, silence, and loneliness. You might welcome death at that point, not out of despair, but out of confusion. You'd forget why you were trying to survive in the first place. So, the realistic timeline is this. Unprotected, you die in 3 to 5 minutes from drowning and hypoxia. With air but no thermal protection, you die in 1 to 3 hours from hypothermia. With air and warmth but no food, you die in weeks from starvation, though psychological collapse happens much sooner. There's no scenario where you survive long term. The deep ocean is too hostile, too alien, too fundamentally incompatible with human biology. And yet, after you die, something remarkable happens. Your body doesn't disappear. It doesn't vanish into nothingness. It becomes part of the ecosystem, because in the deep ocean, even death has a role to play. You're gone, your heart has stopped, your brain has ceased, your cells are dying, one by one. But in the deep ocean, death isn't an ending, it's a transformation. Because what you couldn't survive becomes, ironically, what other creatures depend on. Your body, still drifting slowly through the darkness, is about to become one of the most valuable resources in this barren world, a feast, a lifeline, a gift from the surface. In the deep ocean, food is so scarce that nothing goes to waste. Every scrap of organic matter, every dead fish, every molted shell, every fecal pellet, all of it is consumed, recycled, broken down, and integrated back into the ecosystem. Your body would be no different. In fact, a human body, or any large mammal, is a massive influx of nutrients, rare, precious, the equivalent of a feast that might sustain an entire community of deep-sea organisms for months or even years. The first to arrive would be the scavengers, hagfish, those ancient, eel-like creatures with no jaws, only a rasping tongue covered in tooth-like structures. They're often called the vultures of the sea, and for good reason. Hagfish have an extraordinary sense of smell. They can detect the chemical signature of decaying flesh from kilometers away. They follow the scent trail, swimming slowly but persistently through the darkness until they find the source. When they reach your body, they don't bite, they burrow. Hagfish enter through any available opening, the mouth, the eyes, wounds in the skin, and they eat you from the inside out. They produce enormous amounts of slime when threatened, a defense mechanism, but while feeding, they're methodical, efficient, stripping away soft tissue, muscle, organs. They can tie themselves in knots to gain leverage, pulling against their own body to tear off chunks of flesh. It's not pretty, but it's effective. Amphipods would come next. Small crustaceans that swarm in massive numbers when they detect food. They're only a few centimeters long, but in groups of thousands or tens of thousands, they can strip a carcass clean within days. They crawl over the body, biting, chewing, consuming. Each one takes a tiny piece, but collectively, they're devastating. Time-lapse footage of amphipods feeding on bait placed on the ocean floor shows a frenzy of movement, a writhing mass of tiny bodies, and within hours, the bait is reduced to bones. Giant isopods would join the feast. We talked about them earlier, those oversized pillbugs. They're opportunistic feeders, and a human body would be an irresistible windfall. They'd crawl over your remains, using their mandibles to tear off chunks of tissue. Unlike amphipods, which eat quickly, isopods can afford to be slow. They'll feed until they're gorged, then retreat to digest, sometimes for weeks, before returning if there's anything left. Crabs, too, would arrive. Deep-sea crabs are scavengers, and they're equipped with powerful claws capable of breaking through skin, muscle, even bone. They'd pick at the remains methodically, carrying pieces away to eat in relative safety. Some species of crabs are known to cache food, hiding it under rocks or in crevices for later consumption. Your body might feed a single crab for months. But it's not just the large scavengers. Bacteria would be working from the moment of death, breaking down tissues at the cellular level. In the cold of the deep ocean, bacterial decomposition is slow compared to surface conditions. On land, a body might decompose within weeks. In warm, tropical water, days. But in the deep ocean, the process can take months or even years. The cold slows everything down, preserving the body in a state of slow decay. Certain bacteria specialize in breaking down lipids, the fats in your tissues. Others target proteins. Still others work on carbohydrates. They form a consortium, a community of microorganisms working together to dismantle what was once a living human being. They don't just consume the body, they transform it, converting complex organic molecules into simpler compounds that can be used by other organisms. amino acids, fatty acids, sugars, the building blocks of life, recycled. Eventually, all that would remain are bones. Human bones are made primarily of calcium phosphate, a mineral that's resistant to decomposition, but even bones don't last forever in the deep ocean. Over decades or centuries, they'd be slowly dissolved by the slightly acidic seawater, or they'd be colonized by bone-eating worms, Osedax, sometimes called zombie worms. Osedax are extraordinary. They have no mouth, no stomach, no way to eat in the traditional sense. Instead, they grow root-like structures that penetrate bone, releasing acids to dissolve the mineral matrix and extract the lipids stored inside. They live in symbiosis with bacteria that help them digest these fats. Osedax typically feed on whale bones, but they've been found on other mammal bones as well. They'd colonize your skeleton, slowly, patiently, over years, breaking it down until nothing remains but fragments. This entire process, from fresh corpse to bare bones to dissolved fragments, could take decades. And during that time, your body would have supported hundreds or thousands of organisms. Scavengers, bacteria, worms, each taking what they need, each converting death into life. In a place where food is the limiting factor for survival, you'd become a cornerstone of the local ecosystem. Not because you thrived, but because you failed. Your failure becomes their success. This is true for all large organisms that die and sink to the ocean floor. Whale falls are the most famous example. When a whale dies, it sinks, and its massive body sustains a unique ecosystem for decades. Scientists have identified distinct stages of whale fall succession. First, the mobile scavengers arrive, sharks, hagfish, crabs, and strip away the soft tissue. Then, opportunistic species colonize the bones, extracting lipids. Finally, sulfur-reducing bacteria break down the remaining organic material, creating a chemosynthetic community similar to those found around hydrothermal vents. A single whale can support life for 50 years or more. But whale falls are rare. The deep ocean is vast, and whales, while large, are few. Most of the time, deep-sea organisms subsist on marine snow, that slow rain of tiny particles drifting down from the surface. It's barely enough. Starvation is the baseline. So when something large does fall, a whale, a dolphin, a sea lion, or yes, a human, it's an event, a windfall, a temporary abundance in a world defined by scarcity. And here's the profound part. The creatures that thrive on your remains aren't doing anything malicious. They're not desecrating your body. They're surviving. They've evolved to exploit every resource, no matter how rare or unusual. Death in the deep ocean isn't tragic. It's necessary. It's part of the cycle. Energy flows from the surface, captured by photosynthesis, moving through the food web, and eventually sinking down into the depths. What you couldn't use in life, others use in death. It's elegant. In a way, nothing is wasted, everything serves a purpose. So while you wouldn't survive the deep ocean, what remains of you would feed an ecosystem that has learned to thrive on impossibility. And in that sense, you'd finally belong, not as a living, breathing human, but as a resource, a contribution to the strange and beautiful world you could never have inhabited. But this raises a question. If the deep ocean is so hostile, so deadly to creatures like us, why do we care? Why explore it at all? So we've descended together, through pressure and darkness, through cold and starvation, through isolation and oxygen deprivation. We've watched your body fail in every possible way, and we've seen how, even in death, you'd become part of something larger. Now it's time to come back up, slowly, gently, back to the surface where you belong, back to the world of light and air and warmth. And as we ascend, let's think about what this journey has taught us. You wouldn't survive the deep ocean. That much is clear. Your body is simply not built for it. Every system, every cell, every molecule is calibrated for life on land, or at most, in shallow water. The deep ocean operates under rules that don't apply to you. It's a different world entirely, governed by physics and chemistry that your biology can't accommodate. And that's okay. That's not a failure. It's just reality. You're a surface creature, and the surface is where you thrive. But here's what's remarkable. Despite being utterly incompatible with the deep ocean, humans have still found ways to visit it. We've built submersibles with pressure hulls made of titanium, capable of withstanding hundreds of atmospheres. We've developed life support systems that recycle air, regulate temperature, and maintain pressure. We've sent robots, remotely operated vehicles, down to depths no human could survive unprotected. And we've learned extraordinary things. We've discovered ecosystems that don't depend on sunlight, thriving instead on chemical energy from hydrothermal vents. We've found species that challenge our understanding of what life can be, creatures with antifreeze proteins, bioluminescent lures, and metabolisms so slow they barely register as alive. We've mapped underwater mountains, trenches deeper than Everest is tall, and plains that stretch for thousands of kilometers. The deep ocean, once thought to be a barren wasteland, has revealed itself to be rich, diverse, and full of secrets. And we did all of this not because we could survive there, but because we were curious, because humans have this strange, wonderful compulsion to explore places we don't belong. We climb mountains that can kill us. We venture into deserts where water is scarce and heat is deadly. We send spacecraft to planets with toxic atmospheres and crushing gravity. We push boundaries not out of arrogance, but out of wonder. We want to know what's out there, even if we can never truly live there. The deep ocean teaches us humility. It reminds us that we're not the center of the universe, not the measure by which all life should be judged. We are one species among millions, adapted for one specific environment. Other creatures are adapted for other environments, and they're just as remarkable, just as worthy of study and respect. The anglerfish with its glowing lure, the tube worm with its chemosynthetic bacteria, the hagfish with its ability to survive months without food, they're all solutions to problems we never had to solve, and they're solving them beautifully. There's also something deeply calming about the deep ocean despite its hostility. It's a place that exists entirely outside human concerns. No politics, no deadlines, no traffic or noise or social obligations. Just cold, dark water, stretching out in all directions, indifferent to everything except the basic laws of physics and chemistry. It doesn't care about your achievements or failures. It doesn't judge. It simply is. And there's a peace in that, a kind of quiet acceptance. Tonight, as you drift off to sleep, you're not in the deep ocean. You're in a bed, under blankets, in a room with breathable air and comfortable temperature. You're safe. Your body is warm. Your heart is beating steadily. Oxygen flows freely into your lungs. You're surrounded by an environment that supports you, that allows you to exist without constant struggle. And maybe, just maybe, you can appreciate that a little more now. The simple, miraculous fact that you're alive, that your body works, that you're here. Sleep itself is a kind of descent, isn't it? You sink down through layers of consciousness, moving from wakefulness into light sleep, then deeper into slow-wave sleep, and finally into REM, where dreams happen. It's a nightly journey into your own internal abyss, a place where the rules change, where logic dissolves, where time becomes fluid. But unlike the deep ocean, this is a place you're meant to go. Your body needs it. Your brain requires those hours of rest to consolidate memories, repair tissues, regulate hormones, and prepare for the next day. The deep ocean doesn't sleep. There's no day or night down there, no circadian rhythm, no sunrise to wake to. Creatures drift in a permanent twilight, active or dormant based on internal clocks or the presence of food, not on any external cue. But you have that rhythm. Your body knows when it's time to rest. And tonight, hopefully, you're feeling that pull, that gentle invitation to let go, to stop thinking, to allow your consciousness to sink down into the warm, safe darkness of sleep. Before you do, if you've enjoyed this journey, consider subscribing to the channel. There are more explorations like this waiting for you, more places where biology and curiosity intersect, more questions about how life works and why we're built the way we are. Leave a comment if you'd like. Share where you're listening from, what time it is, or just say hello. It's always nice to know who's out there, drifting through the night alongside me. The deep ocean is a place of extremes, a proving ground for evolution, a reminder that life is resilient, adaptable, and endlessly creative. But it's not your place. Your place is here, on the surface, where air is plentiful, and light is abundant, and food is within reach. You're exactly where you're supposed to be, and in a few hours, when you wake, you'll still be here, safe, warm, alive. The deep ocean will still be down there, dark and cold and patient, waiting for the next curious explorer to visit, but not to stay, never to stay. Rest well tonight, knowing the deep ocean keeps its secrets and you keep yours. Good night. So here we are, back at the surface, back where the air is breathable and the light is real and the pressure is just right. We started this journey by descending into the deep ocean, into a place darker than any cave, colder than any winter, more alien than the surface of Mars. And now we've returned, changed, maybe. At least, I hope you see things a little differently now. We set out to answer a simple question. Why wouldn't you survive the deep ocean? And the answer, as it turns out, isn't simple at all. It's not one thing, it's everything. The pressure that would crush your lungs within seconds, the darkness that would steal your vision and unravel your mind, the cold that would drain your core temperature degree by degree until your heart simply stopped, the starvation that would force your body to consume itself, the isolation that would fracture your sense of reality, the oxygen deprivation that would shut down your brain in minutes, the cellular breakdown, the metabolic collapse, the sensory failure, the toxic chemicals, the impossible timeline. Every single system in your body would fail and fail catastrophically because you were never meant to be there. But here's what I hope you take away from this. Your body isn't weak because it can't survive the deep ocean. It's extraordinary because it's so perfectly adapted for where you are right now. Every breath you take without thinking, every heartbeat that happens automatically, every neuron that fires to let you process these words, all of it is the result of millions of years of evolution, fine-tuning your biology for life on the surface. You're a masterpiece of adaptation. Not for everywhere, not for every condition, but for here, for this, for the world of air and light and warmth that you wake up to every single day. And the creatures of the deep ocean, the ones we met along the way, they're masterpieces too. The anglerfish with its glowing lure, the gulper eel with its impossible jaws, The tube worms thriving on poison, the hagfish surviving on scraps. They're not monsters. They're not aliens, though they certainly look like it. They're just life, solving problems in the only ways that work. They belong in the abyss the same way you belong on land, not because they're stronger or tougher or better, but because they're adapted. Evolution doesn't play favorites, it just responds to conditions. And every environment, no matter how hostile, eventually finds its inhabitants. There's something humbling about that, isn't there? The realization that the world is so much bigger than your experience of it, that there are entire ecosystems functioning right now beneath miles of water in absolute darkness, where everything you take for granted, air, light, warmth, doesn't exist, and yet life persists, not just survives, but thrives. That's the resilience of biology. That's the creativity of evolution. That's the quiet, patient genius of nature figuring out how to exist under any circumstances. And maybe, just maybe, that's a useful perspective to carry into your own life, because you have your own deep oceans, don't you? Your own hostile environments. The things that feel crushing, isolating, dark, and impossible. The stress that builds like pressure. The loneliness that wraps around you like cold water. The exhaustion that drains you of energy. The challenges that seem designed to break you down, system by system, until you forget what thriving even feels like. We all have those moments. Those places where we feel like we're not adapted, where we're struggling just to survive, let alone flourish. But here's the thing. You're still here, you're still breathing, you're still thinking, feeling, adapting, finding ways to move forward, even when the conditions are terrible. That's not weakness, that's resilience. That's your own version of bioluminescence in the dark, your own antifreeze proteins keeping you functional when everything around you is freezing. You might not thrive in every environment, but you find ways to endure, and endurance, quiet and unglamorous as it is one of the most powerful forces in nature. The deep ocean also teaches us about rest, about the necessity of slowing down. Those creatures down there, they don't rush. They can't afford to. Energy is too precious, food too scarce, so they wait, they drift. They exist in a state of low energy conservation, moving only when necessary, resting when possible. And maybe that's something we've forgotten in our surface world of constant stimulation, endless demands, and 24-hour connectivity. Maybe we've forgotten how to slow down, how to drift, how to just exist without always producing, performing, proving. Sleep is your body's way of descending into its own kind of abyss. You sink down through consciousness, through the layers of wakefulness and alertness, into the deep, restorative darkness, where your brain can finally stop processing the outside world and focus on the inside. It clears out metabolic waste, consolidates memories, repairs tissues, regulates hormones. Sleep is maintenance. It's survival. It's your body recognizing that even the most efficient machine needs downtime, needs darkness, needs a break from the relentless pressure of being awake and aware and constantly responding to stimuli. And just like the deep-sea creatures that thrive in conditions we can't survive, your sleeping brain is doing things your waking brain can't. It's making connections, solving problems, processing emotions. Some of your most creative insights happen during sleep, bubbling up from the subconscious in ways you can't force or control. You need that time in the dark. You need that descent. Not forever, but regularly. Every night. It's not optional. It's biology. So tonight, as you drift off, remember the deep ocean. Remember that it exists, vast and dark and patient, indifferent to everything except the quiet laws of nature. Remember that you don't have to survive there because you're not meant to. You're meant to be here, in the light, breathing easily, warm and safe. And that's enough. That's more than enough. That's everything. If you enjoyed this journey, I'd love for you to subscribe. There's so much more to explore together. More questions about biology, more curiosities about how life works in all its strange and wonderful forms. Hit the like button if this helped you relax, if it gave you something to think about, or if it just made the night a little more interesting. And leave a comment. Tell me where you're listening from. Tell me what time it is. Tell me if you've ever wondered what it would be like to visit the deep ocean, or if tonight's the first time you really thought about it. I read every comment, and I love knowing who's out there, drifting through the darkness with me. Before you close your eyes, here's a question to take with you into sleep. What's your deep ocean? What's the environment that feels impossible? The challenge that seems designed to crush you? And more importantly, what adaptations are you already using to survive it? You might not see them yet. You might not give yourself credit, but they're there. You're still here, after all. Still breathing, still adapting, still finding ways to create light in the dark. The deep ocean doesn't need you to survive it, and you don't need to conquer every hostile environment you encounter. Sometimes, it's enough to know your limits, to understand what you're built for, and to rest easy knowing you're exactly where you belong. So rest now. Let the pressure fall away. Let the cold fade. Let the darkness become soft and safe instead of vast and threatening. You've made the journey. You've seen what's down there. And now you get to come home. Sweet dreams. And remember, the deep ocean will still be there tomorrow, keeping its secrets, thriving in its own strange way. But you'll be here, on the surface, where life is warm and bright and full of possibility, right where you're supposed to be. Good night.